I was just really concerned about the fairness of it. It's just not fair to change the rules when voting has already begun. I went public and just said, hey, there are these ballots. If you have any questions, call and ask. And it's my understanding there were a lot of people who called the office that day.
Welcome to Cornhole Champions, a weekly podcast by Iowa Starting Line, where we throw bags at the state's biggest stories. I'm Zachary Oren Smith. It's Wednesday, and I'm joined today by Iowa Starting Line's community editor, Amie Rivers. This week, the Iowa Board of Canvass met to certify the results of the 2024 election. As of this week, the results are finalized. If you followed my coverage leading up to the election, you'll remember the story surrounding 2,000 voters targeted by the state. The state claimed these voters were ineligible, but as my reporting showed, this data was flawed. This week I spoke with State Senator Trone Garriott. She was on the ground fighting to get these ballots counted. That's coming up on Cornhole Champions. So, Amie.
Yeah.
Do you have a winter car emergency kit? It's winter now.
Yeah, it is winter. Yeah, there's the snow on the ground is reminding me. I had to get like a nice big winter coat again this year because mine was crap. But winter emergency, yeah, I have a pair of gloves, a hat, a blanket, and the number for AAA. I think that's all I need, right?
Yeah, and thank you to our sponsor, AAA, for giving us the big bucks.
Can I just be an old for a second and be like, if you don't have AAA, get it. Saved my ass so many times.
But outside of that, I mean, you do have like a winter kit. As
a scraper, yeah.
A scraper, you gotta have a scraper.
Got the
That's
scraper.
Really
like a telescopic snow shovel.
What the is that?
Oh,
a telescopic what?
Well, yeah, it's got the long handle, but then you can shorten it. You know, it's got a little thing where you can fit it in your car easier.
Can you see the North Star using it?
Not that kind of telescope, unfortunately.
Maybe I just don't know what the word telescopic means.
Like it expands.
Okay. That's fun.
It's nice. Yeah, if you get stuck in the snow, need to dig out your tire, it's easier than trying to dig.
But you don't have like cat litter in your car?
No, is that a good one? Do you have that one?
I got the cat litter. I got the blankets. I got some extra mittens in there in addition to my snow brush, a flashlight.
Right.
And then one of my rituals every winter is I go to the gas station and I get what I think of as my emergency chocolate. This is a very special chocolate, right? Like I don't know about you, but like I keep chocolate in the house for daily consumption. I'm a snacker. I'm gonna get me my little square of chocolate. But this is special chocolate. This is utilitarian chocolate. This isn't a Ferrero Rocher, right?
More like a Toblerone bar.
Something that is built to help you survive, right?
So what kind of chocolate does that mean?
I'm so glad you asked. Mr. Good Bar. Mr. Good Bar. It's milk chocolate. It's got peanuts in it. And it is like, for me and mine, I just think of it as like fuel. It's just Zach fuel. It's just fuel for the boys. You're familiar with the boys. Well, we need fuel. And I don't know if you're on the level with the boys, but like there's nothing that hits the way Mr. Good Bar hits.
I guess I'm not on that level. My gas station snacks are more like those pickle chips, the dilly bites. You know what I'm talking about?
They come in like the little bag.
Yeah. Or the big pickle. That's nice.
So I'm a big fan of the big pickle. I grew up eating the gas station pickle at when I was a kid, but I haven't touched the little dilly bites just because it's like it feels like inflation. It feels like greedflation, right? They're taking away our.
Why do I need you to chop them up for more money? Fair, Zach. Yeah.
I used to be able to get a whole pickle, and now all I can get is these little medallion guys, and I don't know where they're coming from.
How do I even know if that's a whole pickle? Right, you don't.
Is that a whole pickle? Is that several pickles? Is that half of a pickle? I could never tell because they're obfuscating.
This podcast.
These big pickle is trying to cut us, is trying to take money out of my pockets, pickles out of my mouth, and I'm sick of it.
This podcast is not brought to you by Dilly Bites.
This podcast is the opposite of a Dilly. This is a Dilly Bites hater podcast.
No, it's not. I love Dilly Bites. Please give us money, Dilly Bites. I'll eat them on camera.
Give us your money. First story. This week's big news is about the future of carbon capture pipelines in Iowa. A proposed 95-mile carbon capture pipeline project has grinded to a stop. Wolf Carbon Solutions, at least for now, has ended its bid for regulatory approval. Wolf Carbon Solutions told Iowa regulators that it is pulling its application for a pipeline project in eastern Iowa. The project would transport as much as 12 million tons of carbon dioxide annually to a storage facility in Decatur, Illinois. In a Monday morning filing to the Iowa Utilities Commission, Wolf's attorney cited uncertainty in its own timeline for securing land. The attorney wrote, "While Wolf has continued to build relationships with landowners and stakeholders interested in the project, a number of factors have continued to delay Wolf's ability to proceed with the project." I reached out for additional comment from both ADM and Wolf Carbon Solutions, but neither returned comment. Amie, have you been following much of these pipeline projects?
Not too much, and I'm so glad that you did a story on that, because I had been wondering about how these have been coming. And of course, it's not just Wolf, but like we should talk about Wolf for a second because it's in the news right now. But I guess overall, why is the ethanol industry pursuing these pipelines?
Yeah, in Iowa, there are three big projects that you should probably know, right? The first is Navigator, which kind of think of it as like kind of the Northwestern project. Summit is the other big one. It kind of runs from kind of central Iowa southeast. And then Wolf was kind of this lone project in eastern Iowa that was running from Cedar Rapids over to Illinois through kind of the Clinton area, Clinton, Iowa, if you know where that is. Really, this is part of a bigger trend by the ethanol industry that has identified that ethanol was always this bridge fuel. And as we find less carbon intensive fuels out there, as electric cars come online, as we find cleaner ways of powering our transportation, the carbon weight of ethanol's production, of all the corn that is required for its production, is just becoming less and less of a kind of good fit for a green future. And so these ethanol plants have shifted over and have decided that if we can get this, if we can sequester this carbon dioxide that we're producing at our plants in underground facilities like the one in Decatur, Illinois, we can kind of lower that carbon intensity and thereby make ethanol a little bit of a cleaner fuel.
And of course, they're going to make money from these pipelines, certainly.
Oh, yeah. And ethanol is all about the money. I mean, keep in mind, like the reason we care about, we're an Iowa podcast, we focus on Iowa stories. Ethanol is a big part of our state's economy, right? It's kind of pursued by Iowa politicians because it was a way of putting corn that we were already growing and putting it into another commodity, right? We were suddenly able to take raise the price of corn because suddenly we had this other use for it. We were able, through the Renewable Fuel Standards Act, we were able to require a certain blend of ethanol in fuel countrywide, right? Mm-hmm. This is big money, right? Because so much of our corn is tied up in the production of ethanol, it's a really important commodity to be thinking about as we're talking about the growth of this state and its future. And there's also a lot of federal funding tied up in it. $1.8 billion has already gone towards carbon capture pipelines nationwide. And under the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's an estimated $12 billion in additional money that will flow towards projects like the one that Wolf was working on. But as the rubber met the road, projects like Wolf Carbon Solutions pipeline in eastern Iowa just didn't have the juice to finish.
I mean, yeah, so how likely is this one to happen? How likely are the others?
Yeah, Wolf's is the latest carbon dioxide pipeline project put on ice. Last year, Nebraska-based Navigator CO2 Ventures canceled its Heartland Greenway project. And more recently, Iowa-based Summit Carbon Solutions had a pipeline permit application denied by state regulators in North Dakota and South Dakota. Summit is still planning to propose a kind of new pathway for its pipeline that will include some of the ethanol plants that are tied up in the now canceled Navigator project. We're talking about Wolf's pipeline in eastern Iowa, but it too ran into some roadblocks over in Illinois. Regulators found that Wolf's agreement with the ethanol plant operator, ADM, wasn't finalized, leading them to deny their application.
How many landowners are going to be affected by that?
Yeah, that's kind of complicated, right? So I was looking around to try to find a good figure for how many folks are within the corridor, and I thought it'd be kind of useful to kind of explain like how we talk about the impact of these pipelines, right? These projects will identify a certain corridor. They'll say that we know we want to run from Cedar Rapids all the way to the Mississippi River, right? And in order to get there, they'll kind of approximate that this is about the right pathway that we want to take. For the Wolf pipeline, you saw the way the kind of regulators approached it was they identified kind of a 2-mile corridor, right, along this kind of pathway, 1 mile on either side of where the pipeline could go. And the idea is that not every landowner they know will say, yeah, you can run that through my farmland, right? Instead, right, they try to add enough wiggle room to say, well, if I can't get through this way, maybe I can, half a mile over, right? Maybe there's that kind of pathway in play. But over time, I think what you saw was a number of grassroots organizers got together with landowners in this pathway, and they said they weren't going to sign the line, that they were not going to give easement over to Wolf's project.
I mean, does this cut across the political divide? I've really noticed, I think, that, the people that are being affected are the ones that would tend to vote Republican, and yet it seems like state Republicans are supporting these projects.
Yeah, it's a super weird story in that if you go look at kind of where the kind of the say no to eminent domain anti-pipeline signs are out in the county, they're often right beside a big Trump sign. They're often beside Republican candidate signs.
Yeah.
So there's like a ton of support, but you also find a bunch of like lefties in urban I live in Iowa City, and you can find these like anti-eminent domain pipeline signs. On some some suburban and urban streets, right? There isn't a clear kind of political vision, I think, for the people impacted by these projects, right? And so instead, you just have kind of values coming to inform some of these decisions. I mean, I think it is true that from a conservative standpoint, the government using eminent domain to take land with or without the landowner's approval, right, or explicit consent, that doesn't sound great.
Right.
I think there are a lot of liberals out there, a lot of progressives out there who would say that, yeah, that actually doesn't sound like a good use of government. That doesn't sound like something government should be involved in.
Right.
That said, it does. I mean, it's not as if it's a right or left issue. I mean, a lot of people on the left will tell you that if we want to reach carbon emission reduction goals in the future, maybe it will take some amount of eminent domain to get there, right? When we're talking about utility scale solar projects, when we talk about the manufacture of new battery technologies, I think there's like a big question about like kind of what is the political constituency surrounding eminent domain. You find out in you and I were talking off the call about. In the Northwest, Ryan Melton, who ran in the 4th Congressional District as a Democrat, he was a big advocate or big opponent of these pipeline projects, right, saying that it's bad politics. It's not good for landowners in this congressional district. And he used it as kind of a cudgel against Randy Feenstra, the U.S. representative who would eventually take the seat.
Yeah.
It's an interesting story to watch because it creates some kind of interesting cross-cut constituencies that aren't necessarily right or left.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting because of that.
And for our second story, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, along with governors from 16 other states, signed a joint letter Monday urging Congress to reauthorize the Farm Bill and to provide, quote, immediate financial assistance to the agricultural sector. Amie, we talked a little bit last week about the Farm Bill. Can you remind me how long we've been on the current Farm Bill?
Yes, 2018. It's helpfully dated in the title, so that's nice. That was the last time it was authorized. It was authorized for 5 years, so that means it was up in 2023. Congress extended it that year through the fiscal and crop year, but have not been able to pass a new farm bill. This is obviously a problem not only for farmers, funding for agricultural, but also like food programs, including SNAP, since that's nutrition programs are like 80% of the Farm Bill.
Is that right? That's a
Yeah.
tremendous. I don't think I realized it was that large of
Yeah.
a piece of it.
Yeah, for sure. So it's definitely something that needs to happen. There are right now 2 competing bills. Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan, a Democrat, has released her version. There's also a House version by Republican Glenn Thompson. So both of those are pretty partisan. They have different priorities, obviously, and we can get into that. But those are the 2 versions on the table that basically really aren't moving right now.
I think for me and for maybe someone listening, they may not realize why the Farm Bill matters. I'm hearing that SNAP, a really important food assistance program, is tied up in here. How much economic value is tied up in the Farm Bill?
Quite a bit. I mean, we're talking millions, potentially billions of dollars of indirect assistance to farmers and to nutrition programs. It's basically, so the original Farm Bill were enacted in 3 stages during the 1930s, part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal legislation. Its 3 original goals were to keep food prices fair for farmers and consumers, ensure an adequate food supply, and protect and sustain the country's vital natural resources. This was sort of in response to, obviously, the economic crisis of the Great Depression, as well as the environmental crisis of the Dust Bowl. So those have kind of been the goals that have shepherded the Farm Bill since then, with obviously different priorities depending on the administration and Congress. But pretty much hasn't really meaningfully changed in the last 70 years. What has changed is sort of how food is grown, farming livelihoods, what kinds of foods are grown, we've added crop insurance, healthy food access for low-income families, beginner farmer training, support for sustainable farming practices. So, I mean, especially given that Iowa is a huge agricultural state, what's in the Farm Bill, what's being subsidized and what's not, really can make a difference between whether you stay on the farm or not. And we know that basically farmers are not able to just farm anymore. Like in 1974, only 37% of family farmers held a primary job off the farm. Now it's 84%.
Wow.
So 84% of farmers can't just farm for their income.
Tie that back to the way that we're using ethanol to kind of support corn prices, right? You know, I kind of see how these kind of connect in our ag sector.
Yeah, and there could definitely be ethanol help or hurt, in the Farm Bill. And I think that's where the 2 versions really come into play there.
What is the likelihood that anything happens with the Farm Bill before the next Congress is seated?
Probably not very likely, just because you've still got Democrats, at least in the majority in the House. So like Representative Glenn Thompson's House bill includes 2 provisions that are really drawing a lot of opposition from Democrats. One would limit future updates to the Thrifty Food Plan, and that's actually the basis for calculating benefits under SNAP. SNAP is, again, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is the nation's largest anti-hunger program for low-income Americans. So if that provision is in, it could prevent a future Democratic administration from increasing SNAP benefits. It'll still increase because of inflation. It just wouldn't be able to increase beyond that. But it also could stop a future Republican president from dramatically rolling back President Joe Biden's major expansion of SNAP. So, again, food benefits would still increase based on inflation, but it really would depend. I think Stabenow's bill does give more to SNAP. And I think that, unfortunately, is a very contentious point. So I don't think that there is any likelihood that we'll get a Farm Bill before next year.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a huge victory for a Democratic presidency, right, where they'd have passed this in addition to some of their other kind of big policy packages. So that makes sense to me. Our third story, a meatpacking plant in Sioux City is once again facing scrutiny for child labor, even though they're not directly hiring children themselves. The U.S. Department of Labor already filed an injunction and temporary restraining order against Fayette Industrial, a company that provides cleaning services to meatpacking plants across the country, including Seaboard Triumph in Sioux City, for illegally employing at least 9 children to clean dangerous meatpacking equipment at night. Last week, they fined another company, Quest, which Seaboard had contracted to clean for them prior to contracting with Fayette. So, Amie, Seaboard Triumph has hired kids twice now. How exactly does that work?
Yeah, so it's technically not Seaboard. So the Department of Labor is obviously going after their direct employer, and a lot of these bigger companies obviously don't directly hire. That also does protect Seaboard, right? So they can say we didn't hire any kids, and they technically did not. They just hired now two companies that have hired kids. So that's kind of a problem for them anyway, like PR wise, if nothing else. But no, technically, Seaboard is not the ones hiring the kids. The cleaning companies are, and these kids are working to clean industrial meatpacking equipment that is really, really dangerous, that they probably don't know how to operate or turn off if they accidentally turn it on. And they're cleaning them in the overnight hours, right? These are kids that are going to school. So, I mean, there's a lot of obviously problems with this, and it's illegal, and so they're being fined obviously for that.
Amy, we keep seeing this. In Cedar Rapids, I remember several Iowa legislators finding going on a tour of a construction site and finding a child working there on the site who was instructed to tell everybody that he was 18 years old. Here we have another. There were some stories in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal looking at the kind of prevalence of child labor in these sectors. Why is it that we keep seeing this seems like a perennial story at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, and Hannah Dreier at the New York Times also did an incredible series on kids working in these dangerous plants.
Hmm.
I think it's a combination of things. Certainly, more enforcement is one of those things. We are seeing the Department of Labor increasing its enforcement. Like in fiscal year 2023, more than half of all U.S. Department of Labor labor investigations resulted in a violation, and they investigated 955
Hmm.
companies and found that they had violations. That's a 14% increase over the prior year, and those civil penalties also increased 83% over the prior year. So it's been a real priority for the Department of Labor. I think, though, that they are also responding to a spate of states, including Iowa, that are relaxing or loosening child labor laws. And the states say that is a direct response to the fact that they're not able to attract workers to their state anymore, and they're trying to shore up employment in the quickest, easiest way possible, and allowing kids to have job experience is how they would put it. Um,
Right.
I would not put it that way. But regardless, yeah, this is happening in a lot of sectors. I mean, you also saw, besides in the construction sector, the restaurants were hit this year after some of those laws came down. And even after the Restaurant Association said, no, you're fine. You can hire 15-year-olds to work at your bar, or what the case may be, past, whatever time it was. And the Department of Labor said, no, we're going to enforce that. And they did.
Right.
So I think it is a reaction. It's somewhat of a political reaction to states basically saying, F you, we're going to do what we want. And the federal government say, no, we have jurisdiction over child labor. No, you're not. So we're seeing this fight play out in real time.
Yeah, and I remember when the legislature passed its child labor bill that the Department of Labor was very clear that you do not have the ability to relax child labor protections
Right.
beneath federal standards, right? That federal standards preempt kind of whatever law the states decide that they're going to pass. This got one North Liberty restaurant, Sugar Peach, in trouble, and it led to. I remember reading in I think it was the Cedar Rapids Gazette, that the kind of restaurant owner describing this scenario is kind of you had been informed by the restaurant association that he had the ability to do all this stuff with underage workers, with minor workers, when the Department of Labor just decided very differently. This will, of course, all change as a new administration comes into the White House.
Right.
But in the meantime, I do think it's put some restaurants in a really precarious situation, being between state and federal regulators.
Yeah, I never blamed the restaurants. And, some people did. They're like, well, they were hiring kids. Well, but our state law and the Restaurant Association, which they pay dues to and rely
Right.
on to interpret that law for them because they're running their own business,
Mm-hmm.
it told them that was okay.
Right.
So I think a lot of the blame for this should really rest on for the Restaurant Association. It should rest on our state government, assuming that they could just push this through with no repercussions.
Right.
And so I think it's just a warning to our small businesses in Iowa to just don't trust them. I mean, you have to do your own research on this, clearly,
Yeah.
because the Department of Labor ultimately has the final say.
Right. State government was aware of the Department of Labor's ruling on this. They
Yep.
just chose to misinform these restaurants about what law requires. Fourth story, Iowa's election results are finally in stone. The long vote certification process happens every year as a means of confirming the final tally of votes. The Iowa Board of Canvass met Monday over the phone and okayed this year's results. According to them, 1.6 million Iowans voted this year. That's short nearly 100,000 votes that were cast during the 2020 presidential election. Voter turnout also was down this year. Sitting on the board was Iowa's Secretary of State, Paul Pate, who praised election officials for their work administering to elections in Iowa's 99 counties.
I was just going to say that's pretty crazy that we're down that many. I got to think that's just an enthusiasm turnout. But
Yeah,
are people
and,
actually...
Pete actually referenced this a little bit the day of the ceremony. He said that while my office has administers to the election and works with election officials on the county level to make sure that every vote gets counted, it's up to campaigns and their messaging to turn out voters. That's really just not that's not his that his office isn't to blame, I guess, for kind of low turnout.
There wasn't any sort of steal you're suggesting?
I would suggest that there was no steal in this election or any previous presidential election.
So why are we worried about this then? I mean, why go to all this effort?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important to kind of because recently there've been for the 2020 election, we still have a president-elect who doesn't believe that the results of the 2020 election were valid. I think it's important, right, that we Iowa journalists that we talk about the transparent process that our state officials, Republican and Democrat, use to certify the results of our election. These begin kind of at the precinct level with the reports that are then filed to the county level. County super boards of supervisors canvass these results. They confirm. They give time for candidates to recount. They give time to make sure that there weren't any issues in any of the precincts reporting. There's even a auditing process that the Secretary of State runs. That all goes to this state canvassing board that eventually has kind of that final say, that final kind of stamp of approval on the results.
Who's on that board?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, right? It's a big deal, right? Obviously, what could be bigger than elections and the kind of the security of those elections. So who would sign off? Well, it's a board composed of the governor, the Secretary of State, the state auditor, the treasurer, and Secretary of Agriculture. They all kind of convene this time over a phone, but I like to imagine, they all convene around a table and say, yes, these look good. Yes, this is our process. These look great. Even though I guess in practice, right? I think it just they teleconference in, but whatever. We'll take what we can get.
That's interesting that Treasury and Agriculture are on there. Like I get Secretary of State because they administer it and Auditor, yeah.
Auditor kind of makes sense,
Yeah.
I guess, if you squint at it. Treasury, I don't know. I think the idea is that these are our biggest statewide offices. These are the folks that would be on any ballot that you would. That Iowans would elect, right? And so, who better to certify these results than, this body of statewide officials that every Iowan has the chance to cast a ballot for.
Yeah, that's true. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel better about it. Thank you.
I love that, and we love to feel a little better about it. And their work includes certifying the results of recounts. We had 1 federal and 3 state legislative recounts this year. Complicating them was the Iowa Secretary of State Paul Pate's 11th-hour decision to challenge the ballots of over 2,000 Iowans he claimed were ineligible to vote. These voters were made to show proof of citizenship before their ballots could be counted. At iowastartingline.com, you can read my reporting on the flawed data used by the state to put barriers in front of these voters' ballots. But in the quick work of election recounts, it became doubly difficult because the Secretary of State kept this list secret, meaning the campaigns that were out curing ballots didn't immediately have access to the list of names of people on this list. One of those was State Senator Trone Garriott of Windsor Heights. Heights. At this point, she has won her election and will return to the state legislature in a month. For our cornhole matchup this week, I spoke with Senator Trone Garriott about the challenge this created for legal Iowa voters. Senator Trone Garriott, thanks for joining me to talk a little bit today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I wanted to start. Can you describe a little bit your following election night? Your race was very close. I think it came down to how many ballots? 19?
19.
For those of us outside of the campaign world, I don't think most of us know the process that follows a really close margin like that. Can you walk me through kind of what kind of where you go, what the kind of next steps for a very close election like that look like?
Election night, we were ahead by 19 votes, and the AP didn't call it because it was so close. And we knew that we would have an opportunity to try to cure ballots until the canvass. So when there's an official tally of votes, about 5 days later, we had a window in which to make sure that any provisional ballots that were outstanding were cured, which means those folks needed to provide some additional information to get their ballot counted. Maybe they had changed their address, so they needed to bring in some proof of that. Or, there was something they needed to provide to make sure their ballots could be counted. So we had a list of these provisional ballots that we got on Thursday following the election. But there was also another list. The Secretary of State had announced after early voting began that he had the secret list of challenged ballots, supposedly challenged because of questions about these voters' citizenship. But because it was a secret list, we didn't know who was on that list.
Which is not typical, right?
It was a real surprise to our county auditors. They were pretty upset about it. And so for the folks who voted in person, they would show up at the polls on election day and they were told your ballot's been challenged, you need to provide additional information. And so every county responded differently. I think some counties might have let people know in advance. Our Dallas County, I came to find out, sent out letters on October 31st.
So just days before presidential election.
Yeah, they did not feel that they were allowed to let the people know that they were on the list until that point, and that was how they chose to notify them. So letters, can take days to arrive.
The Dallas County Auditor's stance was what exactly?
They did not feel that they were allowed to even tell the people on the list until October 31st, and that's when they sent a letter to those folks to let them know. And so, however many days it took for that letter to arrive, if people were even looking for it, if they were paying attention. And so the folks who showed up at the polls, they were told at the polls. And then they were given an opportunity to bring in additional information to prove their citizenship. So we know in some other counties, there were questions about what counted. I think Warren County, there was an individual who brought in their passport and they were told that wasn't sufficient. So there was a lot of confusion from county to county. And so at least for the folks who voted on election day, they were told. They had an encounter with a poll worker and they found out. And they had an opportunity starting that day. For the folks who voted by absentee ballot, they didn't necessarily know until they received that letter. And there were quite a few folks who had no idea. And so on Thursday, we got the list of the provisional ballots. And so we got those names and we started going to those folks' homes and contacting them in any way we could to help them get their ballots cured so they could be counted. But there were 19 absentee ballots on this secret list, and we were told by the county auditor's office that we weren't allowed to know who those people were. So we kept asking to see the ballots, as was the law. We kept asking for their names, and they were telling us, nope, you can't have this list. It's a secret list.
And I mean, what I'm hearing, right? We've seen across the counties that there were instances where poll workers misunderstood the Secretary of State's guidance on what is appropriate documentation of someone's citizenship, a passport being a great example of this. We're seeing kind of like gradations of like kind of how these rules played out, kind of how secure, what was and was not allowed. How does that impact your kind of campaign and its ability to do that kind of post-election day work?
So we were working really hard to try to make sure that my constituents' votes were counted. And for me, yes, it was a very close race. I had a 19 vote lead. So being able to cure additional ballots could help us expand that lead. But for me, this list of 19 individuals whose citizenship was challenged, that was a very personal thing for me because in my day job, I work with all of the diverse religious communities in the Des Moines metro area. I know a lot of people who became citizens, who are very proud of the work that they put in to become citizens. It's an expensive and time consuming process for many. It takes years and years. And they, you know, are very proud voters. And the thought that there are people who had no idea that there was anything wrong, that they'd voted in previous elections, that they had no sense that they would be on this list. And then they would get no notification until the last minute. It was really upsetting to me because I'm like, I know people on this list. I'm sure I do. And so I was just really concerned about the fairness of it. It's just not fair to change the rules when voting has already begun. It's not fair to provide really confusing and vague instruction to the county auditors. The county auditors are very upset about how they were going to implement this and what it was going to mean for their election process. And it was very, very upsetting. And so Thursday, we could not get the list. And all day Friday, we tried to get the information. We wanted to see the ballots. We wanted to know the names. We wanted to help these people be able to vote because if we didn't get it on Friday, the office was closed Saturday, Sunday, and Monday because it was a holiday, and the deadline was noon on Tuesday. And so we tried all day Friday, reached out to the county attorney. The county attorney did not advocate on behalf of what the law says, which is that if a ballot is challenged, it needs to be public record and you need to be able to any voter can come and request that information. So instead they just shut us out and we couldn't get the information. So I went public and just said, "Hey, there are these ballots. If you become a citizen, you should call and ask." Because how else are you gonna know? Check your mail, you might have gotten a letter. If you have any questions, call and ask. And it's my understanding there were a lot of people who called the office that day. Because if you don't know if you're on the list and you don't know your vote's gonna be counted, that's a very unsettling thing to find out.
And in other counties, this list was provided, right? The depending on which county you were in, right? People did or did not receive these lists. This information was or was not available.
Yeah, so it's my understanding that no counties provided or made public the names, the ballots until Friday. And then over the weekend, we continued to try. You know, we sent demand letters. We tried to encourage the county auditor to let us see those ballots. And then Tuesday morning, we started again. So it was a really stressful weekend just because I was so aware that there were people who would just have no idea. And their votes wouldn't be counted unless they took an extra step. Uh, and so, very frustrating. On Tuesday morning, about 2 hours before the deadline, we were finally allowed to see the ballots. And we had called the auditor's office. We had repeatedly said, "Look, these are supposed to be public. Please call the Secretary of State." Secretary of State had not been forthcoming with direction for the county auditors. They finally connected with the Secretary of State finally connected with the county auditor and said, "Oh yes, of course they can see the ballots. They could always see the ballots. They just can't have this list." So it was this like semantic um game that they were playing. And so we got the list, and as quickly as we could, we tried to find contact information for those individuals. And so I had to be at the Capitol for a meeting that morning. And as I'm leaving the Capitol, I have like 1 hour, and I find out that there's a person that we want to reach, but we don't know how to get a hold of them. And another friend said, I think they work for the Des Moines Public Schools. I'm calling the schools where they might be at, and begging staff to pull them out of meetings so I can talk to them, and to be like, I need to get your information to the county auditor. They did not understand the time frame that they had to do that by. They had their documents ready. They were going to bring them in, but they just did not quite understand that it was like in the next hour. Luckily, this person had a spouse at home. The documents were there. I drove to their house, brought the documents to the county auditor's office, 20 minutes left to spare. There was another person that we brought their documents in, so they were cured. And then there was one more that one of our folks had gone to their home, and this person said, I want to bring my documents in myself. So we're waiting in the office for that third person. And 3 minutes before the deadline, they walk in with their documents, hand the passport over, and it's somebody I know. It's a religious leader in the community that I worked with. Voted previously, had no idea that they didn't think they would be on this list. They had no reason to suspect that. And so their vote was able to be counted in the last moments. We got through that curing period, and we gained 5 more votes. There were 2 people on the provisional list and 3 from that secret list that we were able to cure. And so we went into a recount after that. And because the recount process, they were using the machine, but every once in a while there were some ballots that weren't reading quite right. If you don't fill in that circle just perfectly, or you go outside a little bit, it can miscount. And so we actually gained 5 more votes in the recount. So I ended up coming out ahead with 29 votes. So we added 10. So that was almost doubled my margin.
Well, congratulations on the double margin.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what's a bigger proof that your vote matters, right? Whether it's the small margin of win, or it's the hours someone's going to spend to try to make sure it gets added to the final tally. That's
Yeah. Well, and it was just really upsetting to me because it's people that I know in our community, people that I care about. And I want their vote to be counted. And so I had some other friends who were in just leaders in different religious communities, different ethnic communities, that I had shared the list with, just to try to see, is there anyone here? And there was one other person that folks did know, but they said they're in India right now. They had voted by absentee, left the country, and the letter will be waiting for them when they get home. So their vote did not get counted, no fault of their own. They did everything right. And because they had not received proper notice, and because we couldn't contact them, you know, they're on the other side of the world, not enough time, they couldn't send the information that they needed to have their vote counted. Just so unfair.
Iowa code and federal law has stipulations for voter roll purges, right? That's a necessary part of our system, right? We want to make sure that all of the people that are on our list of eligible voters are in fact eligible ahead of an election, well ahead of an election, right? There are kind of timelines for how close to an election you can begin purging names from a roll. I think for me, someone who's been watching elections in the state for a couple years now, I was surprised to find it happening this close to an election, right? We're talking about within a month of a presidential election. When I'm thinking about this story, it's like, for me, the timeline is really suspect. The Iowa legislature will once again have the ability to do something about our election laws. After the 2020 Rita Hart, Miller Meeks recount, I think there was a lot of attention on the ways that recount boards function. I think there's a lot of work that could be done to clarify Iowa code so that issues like this list of names, this kind of secret list of names. I think there could be some action there. I wonder if you personally or you've heard anyone who has plans for doing something about clarifying Iowa code for these actions by the Secretary of State.
I feel that the code was clear. It just wasn't followed. In this situation, well, that these ballots should have been public record, that any voter should have been able to view these ballots. It's pretty clear if a ballot's been challenged, that's the process. And and so because this list was treated like it was in some different category, maybe it was challenged, maybe it wasn't. So then the existing code didn't apply to it. I mean, I think it could be helpful to have something to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. You should not be able to challenge a whole list of voters, keep that list secret, and you should not be able to do that after voting had already begun. Those folks who were requesting their absentee ballots should have found out at that moment when they made the request that there was a problem and provided that information at that point, not months after that request period opened. Voters deserve to have proper notice. It's just that we're going into a legislative session again with a Republican majority in the House and the Senate. I don't know if there's any interest in making sure that these voters are protected.
But are you interested in proposing any legislation that might clarify some of the? I mean, because clearly, while Iowa code might have been, you feel that Iowa code is clear on this, it does address this.
I would be glad to propose something, but I also know how it works in Iowa legislature. The majority party decides what bills get a public hearing, and Democratic-sponsored bills do not get a public hearing.
Senator Sarah Trone Garriott, I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to speak to me about this, about the kind of final notes of this story. Bringing us to a close, can you tell folks a little bit about, if they want to kind of follow your work in the upcoming legislative session or leading up to the legislative session, where you would point them to?
So I'm pretty active on social media. You can find me on TikTok and Twitter. I will never call it the other thing. Instagram and Facebook at Sarah for Iowa. And I do have a pretty involved, specific, robust legislative newsletter that I work very hard on to make sure that folks are engaged. So that's another place to find me.
Senator Trone Garriott, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Zachary.
So, Amie, what'd you make of that?
I mean, if I was the voter who went to India after I thought I legally voted and then found out my vote didn't count because of this debacle, I would hire a lawyer probably. I am no lawyer, and this is not legal advice. We should just give that disclaimer up front. But I would be very upset about this. And I think that she's right. I think that Iowa code specifically says you can't do this. At least statewide. I don't know if even there's federal laws against this. If there's not, there should be. And I also think that, yeah, maybe she should be sponsoring something, whether it goes anywhere or not, to prevent this from happening again.
Yeah, there are federal and state laws that set up timelines for when you can do kind of systematic voter purges, like the one that Secretary of State Paul Pate was engaged in with these over 2,000 Iowans, many of whom were new citizens. That was another episode of Cornhole Champions. If you like the show, please rate it and subscribe and share it with your friends. Sign up for my newsletter at cornholechampions.substack.com. For these stories and more, go to iowastartingline.com. Cornhole Champions is a weekly podcast powered by Iowa Starting Line. Thanks to the whole team. We'll see you with the new episode next Wednesday. And until then, I'm Zachary Oren Smith.
I'm Amie Rivers.
Thanks for listening. and not happy Thanksgiving.
Not happy Thanksgiving.
Period.
Thanksgiving's over.
Thanksgiving's over, man.
It's
Turkey's
Christmas time now.
turkey ate. Me, I'm making room for that new turkey. I'm making room for turkey 2.
Oh, you have turkey for Christmas as well?
You think I'm not gonna have turkey? You think I'm not gonna have a bird for Christmas?
You gotta have a Christmas ham, I feel like.
I am a red-blooded American. I'm gonna eat as many turkeys as I can. Thanksgiving, Christmas, that's just honestly, that's not even turkey 1 and 2. That's just like that's turkey 13 or 14.
You're in
I'm
Iowa
crazy
now.
about
The
this
rules are
stuff.
different, Zachary. We eat ham. All right, maybe not we, because I'm a vegetarian, but the royal we.
Stolen valor. Stolen valor.
I'm gonna get one of those fake hams and eat that on the podcast, and just own the haters.
You and your fake liberal ham. I'm done with it. Have a good one, Amy. It was good talking with you.
You too.
Later, dude.
Later.